My Hero Academia chapter 191 was pretty interesting in my opinion. However, there were a few things that I thought could have been done better honestly, but as a whole the chapter wasn't bad whatsoever. That's not really what I'm trying to say. What I am trying to say, however, is that there were a few plot points in this chapter that I thought could have either been better paced or altered slightly, because one of the worst things or qualities about this chapter in my opinion was the pacing. And what I mean by that is that everything seemed to happen very quickly. Ever since last week, we've been waiting for the encounter between Dabi and Endeavor. Although it wasn't confirmed whether Dabi was in fact a Todoroki, people wanted to see what was going to be happening between these two characters, and although we do have like a very brief encounter, it's not really leading up to anything big, you know, they're interrupted as you'd expect, because at the end of the day, Endeavor and HAWKS are seemingly at their very limits. They cannot continue fighting at this point, especially not Endeavor, who's been fighting the Nomu non-stop until the Nomu finally took an L. And obviously it's at that point that Dabi turned up, and you know, everyone wanted to know what was going to happen, but it just felt like everything happened so quickly in my opinion. Like, you know, you have the whole thing, he comes in, he starts charging in because he's obviously making a joke about him not being strong enough to take on the two strongest heroes who are at their limit. And then we have Miruku, the fucking bunny hero, just showing up out of nowhere. I mean, I kind of expected someone to interrupt, but I was hoping it would be someone of, you know, a better standard or whatever you want to call it. Like, I just didn't expect Miruku out of all heroes to show up and save the day, or at least make sure that Endeavor wasn't harmed. Like, who even cares about Miruku at this point? Like, Jesus Christ, she's not necessarily a bad character, don't get me wrong, but it's just that we know so little about her that, you know, just seeing her save the day just kind of boggles my mind to some extent, because she's not someone that's been hyped up or anything, and she's also very recently introduced as one of the new top 10 heroes. It would have been more interesting to see someone that we maybe knew about, especially since it was so brief and so out of nowhere. I mean, if it was something that had a more build up to it, and sure, maybe Miruku would have been a good choice, but I feel like at this point wasn't really to my liking. However, the whole Dobby thing as a whole I still liked. It's just that, you know, these details didn't really satisfy my personal preferences. Now, the last thing that I didn't really like about the chapter, but this is not something that I would say is a bad thing objectively speaking. Like, a lot of people did like this, don't get me wrong, it just doesn't go really well with what I value in a story, and that is the whole double agent element that was introduced in this chapter, when HAWKS is apparently trying to get into the League of Villains so that he can relay information to the good guys. So at first we are led to believe that HAWKS is obviously a bad guy because he is actually talking to Dobby, and at this point in the chapter we didn't know that he was a double agent. But then later on in the chapter we also find out that, you know, he's actually doing this for the good guys, even though it did earlier on made us think that he was doing it for himself and nothing else, and he was just helping the bad guys, but that's not really the case at all. And this is kind of what I mean by the chapter being very quickly paced. In fact, it's too fast paced in my opinion, because things are just moving so fast. It would have been more interesting to see HAWKS having this conversation with Dobby, and then, you know, at a later time, maybe that is when we find out that HAWKS would have been a double agent, rather than actually having all of this being set up in one chapter. I feel like that would have been a much better way to actually build up HAWKS' character, especially since a lot of people have been speculating that HAWKS may be a bad guy deep inside, but in this chapter, you know, they're just teased very quickly that he may be, and then suddenly he's not. And me personally, although I don't have a problem necessarily with the plot point itself, I just felt like it was happening way too fast. I mean, it's true, it's not to my personal preference, but at the end of the day, you know, I'm still gonna enjoy the story for what it is. And, you know, just because he's a double agent, it doesn't mean it's gonna affect the story overall. It's just that HAWKS' character is going to be written as more of a double agent rather than being, you know, your straight up hero. He's gonna be a hero, you know, on the surface, but then if you go a few layers below, you're gonna get this whole double agent element where he's working for the higher ups so that he can get into the League of Villains and find out what they're up to, and, you know, maybe the good guys can actually take advantage of that. So HAWKS is a really good character. He's a good guy for sure at this point. I am not convinced that he's a bad guy. Like, maybe he could end up actually joining the League of Villains because he feels like, while he is undercover with Dobby and everyone else, right? Like, he's getting into the League of Villains, villains, maybe he will feel swayed by the League of Villains in some way and he will turn evil. I personally don't think this is going to happen, especially given what happened in this chapter. You know, Dobby's being very sketchy to HAWKS, especially since they had a deal and he broke that deal and stuff like that, you know. A lot of things went down really, and in one chapter at that. Now what I did like about this chapter is the whole Dobby stuff, because I really didn't want Endeavor to die, and obviously he didn't die. I mean, a lot of people speculated that he would die by Dobby's hands, of course, because of the fact that there has been such a big rumor about them being related, and then the fact that Dobby was standing right next to them while Endeavor was at his limit, so he couldn't really defend himself. But then, as I said, we have the whole Miruku thing, you know, preventing him from dying, which you could say is plot convenience, but you could also say it's a good thing. Me personally, I don't really consider it a bad thing necessarily. I just had hoped that the interference would have been from a much better character. Maybe it's just me though. One thing that I want to talk about, or at least mention, is when Dabi actually needed to escape, he called for someone called Uchiko, I think it was, and this is a name that we haven't heard of before. We have seen the quirk that was being used though. It is the quirk that All For One forcefully activated to transport people from the bar and to the Camino ward, and the other way around. You know, he was really using this as a transportation method for other people, and this character in question is obviously the one who actually has this quirk. So it's a member of the League of Villains that we haven't really seen before, I think. Like, I don't recognize this name. I don't think we've visually seen this guy. I think this is a guy that's been in the shadow for a long time. He's been in the League for a long time, of course, especially since he has been with the League since the Camino arc happened. So he's not a new guy at all, but he is someone that we just haven't seen around. I really hope we get to see more of this guy, especially since he has now been named. So having him being shown soon is something that I could actually expect seeing, although next chapter might be a bit soon. Of course, it depends really what direction this arc is going, because although HAWKS is being used as a double agent for, you know, the good guys and the League of Villains, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be seeing all of that. Like, a lot of this might be happening off screen, and that's kind of what I'm expecting, to be honest, especially since HAWKS isn't really part of the main cast. Although he's the #2 pro hero at the moment, I still don't see a lot of this being on screen unless the arc actually focuses around this whole double agent element. But personally, I don't think that's gonna be the case. I think this arc is kind of reaching its climax at this point, and we're gonna get back to the main cast very soon, and obviously at a later time we're probably gonna see more results on HAWKS' efforts to be a double agent in the League of Villains. Anyway, I'm gonna end the review here, so I hope you like this chapter. I liked the chapter as a whole, although like I said, you know, there were a few ups and downs, but that doesn't mean the chapter was bad by any means. But I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments, and I bet some of you are gonna fucking attack me for what I said, but that's okay. And as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember everyone, Togai's waifu, Togai's laifu.